I walked in thinking it would be just another evening, the kind of quiet night where nothing matters more than a warm home and the familiar rhythm of routine. But then I heard it, her laughter, bursting through the thin walls like shards of glass, laughing uncontrollably, and not at something silly, not at a joke we shared in our own bubble, but with someone else, a friend, plotting, rehearsing, scheming. The words weren't meant for me, but they found me anyway. She was practicing a divorce speech, practicing how to tell me that everything I believed in, everything I thought we built together, was about to be taken away. I froze. My chest tightened. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I pressed my ear closer to the crack in the door, and each syllable she spat out felt like fire hitting a wound I didn't know I had. Shock rolled over me, cold and unrelenting. I couldn't breathe properly. My mind spun, tried to latch onto a reason, a mishearing, a misunderstanding, but there was none. The truth was naked, loud, and cruel. Every memory I had of us flashed across my mind. Our dinners, our laughter, the quiet nights I thought were hers as much as mine. Had I missed something? Was I blind to her dissatisfaction? The doubt clawed at me, sharp and relentless. I replayed every conversation, every small argument, every compliment and smile, trying to find a crack, a hint, a warning I could have caught. But there was nothing, or maybe I just hadn't wanted to see it. Maybe love, real love, is blind until it isn't anymore. I felt a sinking, a pulling weight in my stomach that I couldn't shake. The home I walked into, the life I thought I knew, suddenly felt like a stage I wasn't meant to be on. She and her friend, conspirators in a reality I wasn't allowed to enter, chose to rehearse betrayal as though it were a performance. And I was the audience of my own undoing, silent, invisible heart hammering in my chest. Anger, confusion, heartbreak. They came in waves, each one heavier than the last. I wanted to knock on that door, to shout, to demand answers, to beg for what was left, but my voice betrayed me. It wouldn't come. I was paralyzed by the enormity of what I'd just discovered. The person I trusted most in the world had begun dismantling our life piece by piece. And the cruelest part? I didn't see it coming. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not in clarity, not in understanding, but in a subtle, terrifying awareness that the world I had known was no longer real. Every laugh, every casual glance, every touch felt like it had been borrowed from someone else's story. I realized then, with a hollow weight pressing against my ribs, that I couldn't go back to being the same man who thought he knew love. I couldn't. All I could do was stand there, listening, absorbing, feeling the fracture in my chest widen, the foundation of everything I believed in crumble. And beneath the chaos, beneath the fire of betrayal, a quiet, cold question took root. If the person you love can practice leaving you without you knowing, then who are you, really, in the story of your own life? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing. The life I thought I had, the love I believed was unbreakable, was gone. And from that shattering, from that raw, aching realization, something else began. Not forgiveness, not anger, not clarity. Something else. A seed of awakening. A whisper that told me, slowly, painfully, that I had to see this truth, however ugly, in order to survive it. Because surviving it meant facing the heartbreak head-on, letting it tear through me, and realizing, maybe for the first time, that what I had lost was never just her. It was the illusion I carried of us, of safety, of permanence. And now, staring into the echo of her laughter, I had no choice but to confront it. I had no choice but to start picking up the pieces. I can't stop seeing her face. It's everywhere, in the corner of my mind, in the echoes of rooms we shared, in the quiet spaces that used to feel safe. Every memory we built together has turned into a ghost that follows me relentlessly. Our vows, once sacred words I swore I'd protect forever, now feel like knives I didn't see coming. Every laugh, every dream we whispered in the dark, it's all tainted, smeared with a sense of deception I can't erase. I find myself replaying moments I used to cherish, try to find the exact point when something went wrong. Was it something I said? Something I didn't say? Was it the nights I was too tired to notice her distance? I ask myself these questions endlessly, but the answers never come. I just end up trapped in the same looping torment, where every memory becomes evidence of my own failure. I try to confront her, in small ways at first. A question here, a subtle observation there, trying to sound casual, trying to catch her off guard. But she doesn't flinch. She doesn't even glance my way in that nervous way I would expect from someone hiding guilt. Instead, her laughter cuts through the room like a blade. It's effortless, unbothered, casual. It's as if I'm the one who's out of place, the one who doesn't belong in the world we built. I watch her smile, the same smile I once adored, and it feels like betrayal wrapped in sunlight. Beautiful, but lethal. The more I watch, the more I question myself. Did I miss the signs? Am I too naive, too trusting, too weak to notice the fractures until they exploded in my face? I can feel paranoia creeping into every thought. Every whispered word between her and a friend, every glance she gives me, every pause before she answers. It's a puzzle I can't solve, and the pieces keep slipping from my fingers. My mind becomes a battlefield where love, trust, and doubt collide in endless loops. I reach out to my closest friend, the one person I thought could anchor me in this storm. He listens, patient, silent, letting me pour out my fear and confusion. I tell him how I can't sleep, how I can't stop thinking about what I've lost, how I feel like I've failed at the one thing that should have been unshakable. And he doesn't offer easy comfort, doesn't sugarcoat the truth. He simply says, you need to see it clearly. Not what you want it to be, not what you hope it is. See it as it is. And for the first time, I realize that seeing the truth won't make it hurt less. It will make me stronger. Or maybe it will break me. Even at work, even around relatives, I feel like a spectator in my own life. My coworker notices my distracted state. My uncle comments on my distant demeanor, and I see it reflected back in their faces. Confusion, concern, a hint of judgment. I can't escape it anywhere. Every word I speak, every smile I force, feels hollow. I am haunted not just by her actions, but by the reflection of myself in the aftermath. Someone I thought was confident, secure, whole, now fractured, questioning every instinct, every decision, every memory. I begin to notice patterns in my paranoia. I track her moods, her casual phrases, the way she touches her phone. I replay conversations in my head, imagining hidden meanings in every laugh and sigh. I feel like I'm losing control of my own mind, letting suspicion become a shadow I can't shake. And yet, even in this chaos, a small voice inside whispers, you must endure. You must understand before you can act. You must see this betrayal, raw and naked, before you can find a way to reclaim yourself. But the betrayal isn't just hers. It's the way it forces me to confront my own vulnerabilities. My trust, my openness, my willingness to believe in love suddenly feels like a weakness. I ask myself if I am too soft, too willing to forgive, too blind to protect what I hold dear. Every time I look at her, I see not just her laughter, not just her disregard, but my own reflection in the mirror of deception. I am both the witness and the wounded. And yet, beneath the swirl of anger, despair, and paranoia, I start to feel a strange clarity forming. Not comfort, not closure, but awareness. I realize that betrayal is not only a revelation of her choices. It is a revelation of mine, too. A mirror that shows what I ignored, what I tolerated, what I refused to see. It is cruel, yes, but is also brutally honest. I don't have answers. I don't even have a plan. All I have are echoes, echoes of vows that were broken, laughter that cut too deep, dreams that are slipping away. And in those echoes, I hear the faintest hint of something I haven't felt in a long time. The possibility that if I survive this, if I endure this, I might find a version of myself that is stronger, sharper, awake to what I once refused to see. For now, all I can do is sit with it, listen to it, and let it shape me. The betrayal is real. The pain is real. And slowly, painfully, I begin to understand that nothing I thought was permanent ever really was. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. It pressed on me like a weight I couldn't move, a pressure that made my chest ache and my head pound. Every room in the house felt foreign, every corner a reminder of laughter I was no longer part of. I needed to hear it from her. I needed the truth, no matter how brutal. When I finally spoke, my voice trembled despite my efforts to steady it. I called her name, and when she turned, her face was the same as it always was, calm, composed, maybe even amused, but the eyes told a different story. They were distant, calculating, unbothered. And in that moment, I realized just how far apart we had drifted without me noticing. I asked her directly, as clearly as I could manage, "What is this? What are you doing?" Her laughter came again, soft this time, controlled, but it cut through me sharper than any knife. "You think it's something dramatic," she said, "but it's just the truth. Something you weren't ready to see." I felt my stomach twist. My mind raced through every memory, every promise we had made. The words I had imagined, the security I had taken for granted, they were gone. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand some kind of humanity, some flicker of remorse, but she didn't give me that. She only gave me clarity, brutal and raw. Her friend was there too, quiet in the corner, observing, a silent witness to the unraveling of my world. Their presence made it worse, somehow, like I was trapped in a cage while they held the keys. My voice shook, but I pushed on, asking the questions I had rehearsed in my head for nights. Why? How long? What does this mean for us? And she told me. Every word, every plan, laid out with a precision that left no room for misunderstanding. She was leaving. She had planned this for months, maybe longer. Her detachment was absolute, almost clinical. There was no hesitation, no glance of guilt, no pause that might have suggested she cared. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't just about a single choice. It was the erosion of connection, the absence of love, the way she had prepared herself to walk away while I was still holding on. I felt a part of me break, the part that believed in fairness, in shared history, in loyalty. But another part, the part that had been listening, questioning, sensing for weeks, started to awaken. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I saw her not as the partner I loved, but as someone capable of planning the dissolution of what we had built without a flicker of doubt. And with that realization came clarity, painful as it was. This wasn't about me failing her or about anything I'd done wrong. It was about her capacity to leave. I couldn't help myself. Anger surged through me, a fire that I had tried to contain. I accused her, not with restraint, but with the full weight of my betrayal, of nights spent doubting, of moments I had replayed, wondering where I had gone wrong. And she responded not with remorse, but with explanations that sounded rehearsed, practiced, like the very speech I had overheard weeks ago. Her calmness, her certainty, became the hardest thing to swallow. At one point, a neighbor peeked through the window, curious about the raised voices, the tension spilling into the hallway. I didn't notice, couldn't notice. I was inside a storm of emotion, wrestling with shock, grief, rage, and the strange, sinking feeling of seeing someone you love as they truly are, stripped of every illusion. I wanted answers, but some answers aren't meant to soothe. Some truths aren't meant to fit neatly into the life you thought you had. The confrontation didn't give me peace. It didn't give me closure. It gave me raw, jagged reality. I had to face her detachment, her certainty, and the undeniable fact that the life I had imagined together was already gone. And in that brutal clarity, I felt vulnerability unlike anything I had known. I was exposed, stripped bare, forced to confront not just her choices, but my own reliance, my own attachment, my own willingness to believe in something that no longer existed. Courage wasn't in keeping my voice steady or hiding my tears. It was in standing there and facing the truth, in letting myself feel every ounce of hurt, every stab of betrayal, every pang of disbelief without turning away. By the time the conversation ended, when she walked out with the ease of someone who had already rehearsed a goodbye, I was left alone in the quiet house, still trembling, still raw. But beneath the devastation, a strange, heavy awareness settled in. I had survived the confrontation. I had faced the full weight of her detachment. I had seen the reality of the betrayal. And in that survival, in that staring down of truth, I realized something fundamental. Pain is inevitable, but surrender is optional. Betrayal cuts deep. Yes, but clarity, no matter how brutal, can become the first step toward understanding yourself, toward reclaiming your life. Because when everything you thought you knew collapses around you, you either remain buried under the rubble, or you begin to stand among it, shaking, wounded, but awake. The days after the confrontation passed in a strange, disorienting haze. It wasn't just grief, it was a kind of numbness that seeped into every corner of my life. Nights stretched endlessly. Sleep became an elusive stranger, slipping away the moment I closed my eyes. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying her words, her laughter, the way she walked away with certainty, leaving me with nothing but questions and a hollow chest. Even simple routines became impossible. Coffee tasted bitter, my phone felt like a trap, and walking into rooms I once considered familiar felt like stepping into a stranger's house. Every interaction carried layers I couldn't ignore. A coworker's casual remark sounded like judgment. A friend's smile felt like an accusation. I was haunted by the sense that the world had shifted, that everything I had trusted to be stable now bore the weight of suspicion. I tried to escape it in motion, work, errands, distractions, but nothing held. Every moment of stillness returned me to her absence, to the echo of betrayal. My thoughts became obsessive, circling endlessly, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to find a way to rebuild something that was irreparably broken. But clarity was elusive. Pain was constant, and I realized, slowly, that I couldn't outrun it. One night, in the middle of a restless walk through empty streets, I found myself at a small cafe I had passed 100 times but never entered. I wasn't looking for answers, only for something to interrupt the storm inside me. There, behind the counter, was someone entirely unexpected. A quiet, calm presence that didn't rush, didn't judge, didn't demand. Something about the way they moved, the way they listened, hinted at a wisdom that seemed effortless, like a river flowing around obstacles rather than colliding with them. I began talking, at first about trivial things, coffee, the weather, the mundane, but slowly, like a dam cracking under pressure, I started speaking about everything else. My voice trembled, hesitant at first, then more urgent. I spoke of sleepless nights, of obsession, of betrayal, of the unbearable weight of living in a world that suddenly felt cold and empty. They didn't offer platitudes, didn't tell me to move on or let go. Instead, they asked questions, subtle, patient questions that forced me to look at myself as much as at the pain inflicted on me. "Why do you carry it like this?" they asked quietly, as if asking the question aloud might make the weight visible. "What part of you is still trying to hold on to what's gone?" At first, I couldn't answer. My chest tightened. I felt exposed. But in their presence, I felt something else too, a glimmer that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to collapse under the weight of it. Their calm wasn't distant. It was grounding. It made the chaos in my head feel like a storm I could observe rather than be swallowed by. I started to journal after that night, a practice I had long dismissed as trivial. Words became a lifeline. I wrote down the endless loop of thoughts, the small betrayals I felt, the heartbreak I carried. But I also began writing questions I didn't have answers to yet. Questions about myself, my strength, my ability to endure. And with every page, I noticed something subtle happening. I was beginning to see myself outside the narrative of betrayal. I wasn't just a victim of her choices. I was a person capable of feeling, reflecting, surviving, and eventually understanding. Even in these early days of reflection, life still felt unreal. Shadows of doubt follow me everywhere. Every smile, every gesture felt filtered through suspicion. But I was learning to sit with it, to let it exist without letting it define me. That was the first lesson of this new world. The cold didn't have to freeze me completely. It could sharpen me instead. And the mentor, this quiet, observant presence, never told me what to do. They never promised healing or a return to normalcy. But they showed me, through patience and presence, that strength could exist in small, almost invisible ways. Strength wasn't a sudden surge or a heroic act. It was showing up every day, acknowledging the pain, and choosing to see yourself as more than the sum of betrayal and heartbreak. I left that cafe that night with no illusions. The world outside was still cold. The nights were still long. But for the first time, I felt a faint pulse beneath the numbness, a small, stubborn heartbeat insisting that I could endure this, that I could look at my reflection and recognize someone who had been shattered but not defeated. And in that subtle shift, I understood the truth that would guide me forward. Survival isn't just about escaping the storm. It's about standing in it long enough to feel the first rays of light breaking through the clouds, knowing that even in a world turned cold, there's the faintest promise of warmth. The nights were the hardest. The silence screamed louder than any confrontation could. Every thought of her, the way she laughed, the casual way she planned to leave, the ease with which she had dismantled my life, ignited a storm inside me. Anger, despair, hurt, and disbelief collided, and I felt pulled in every direction at once. Part of me wanted revenge, a sharp, satisfying retaliation that would make her understand the weight of what she had done. Another part, quieter but insistent, whispered that destruction would only chain me to her betrayal forever. I realized then that this was the crossroads I had been walking toward all along. Not just a choice about her, but a choice about myself. How I reacted now, how I let this pain shape me, would define more than the next few weeks or months. It would define the person I became. Revenge would give me a fleeting sense of satisfaction, a hollow victory. Rebuilding myself, that was harder, slower, and terrifying. But it was real. It was lasting. I found myself reflecting on every subtle pattern I had ignored, every contradiction in her words, every small hypocrisy that had once seemed trivial. The way she criticized others while excusing herself, the way she smiled when she shouldn't have, the casual tone in which she spoke of plans that didn't include me. It all started to line up like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to see. And in those patterns, I found clarity. Not just about her choices, but about the way I had allowed myself to be blind, to place my trust unquestioningly, to define myself by someone else's presence rather than my own worth. My mentor's voice echoed in my mind, the quiet, patient questions that forced me to examine not just the external betrayal, but the internal weaknesses I had tolerated. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you beneath the weight of pain? I began to understand that these questions weren't rhetorical. They were the only ones that mattered. The answers would determine my path. I pictured the act of revenge, the imagined scenarios where I would strike back, expose her lies, make her feel a fraction of my torment. The thought was tempting. The fire in my chest roared at the idea of seeing her falter, of feeling some control in a world that had spun out of my grasp. But beneath the heat, I felt a cold truth. Revenge would never restore what I had lost. It would never rebuild my trust, my peace, my life. It would only extend the prison she had helped construct around me. So I began to shift my focus inward. I thought about resilience, about endurance, about reclaiming the version of myself that had been dormant under the weight of betrayal. I thought about small victories, waking up without dread, feeling the sun on my face without bitterness, completing a task without the shadow of obsession. These weren't grand gestures. They weren't the dramatic triumphs I imagined in my darker moments. But they were real, tangible, and mine. I started noticing her patterns not with the intent to attack, but to understand, to protect myself. Her detachment, her rehearsed words, her casual disregard. They were no longer sharp surprises. I could see them coming. And in seeing them, I realized something crucial. The power she held over me wasn't in her actions. It was in my response. If I let anger dictate my choices, she would continue to control my life from afar. But if I chose self-reclamation, every small decision, every moment of clarity became my own. The decision wasn't immediate. It wasn't clean or triumphant. It was messy, full of hesitation and lingering rage. I allowed myself to feel the full force of everything. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the sting of recognition that someone I loved so deeply could leave me with such detachment. I let the storm rage inside, unfiltered, unashamed. And then, slowly, I began to feel the first glimmer of calm beneath it, a quiet, steady pulse reminding me that life wasn't just what she had taken. By the time I stood alone in my apartment that night, the choice was clearer. I would not give her the satisfaction of controlling my life further. I would not descend into revenge, because that path would only chain me to her betrayal. Instead, I would reclaim myself. I would rebuild piece by piece, day by day. I would notice the subtleties, the hypocrisies, the patterns, not to fight her, but to protect myself. And in doing so, I would find a resilience that had been hidden under shock and despair all along. The path forward was uncertain. It was frightening, demanding, and lonely, but it was real. And in that reality, I felt a strange, fragile sense of power. Not over her, not over the past, but over the only thing I could ever truly control, myself. For the first time since discovering the truth, I didn't feel entirely lost. I felt like someone who had been shattered, yes, but someone who could survive the pieces. Someone who could stand again, raw and aware, and decide what kind of life, what kind of self, was worth building from the ruins she had left behind. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Purpose. Not a fleeting distraction, not a temporary escape, but the quiet, deliberate intention to reclaim the life that had been slipping through my fingers. It started small, almost imperceptibly. I stopped answering messages that didn't serve me, stopped forcing conversations that left me drained. I drew boundaries, invisible walls that shielded me from the chaos I had once let invade every corner of my life. Work became my first arena of control. I approached tasks with precision, not as a way to prove anything to anyone, but as a way to prove something to myself. The hours I had once spent replaying her betrayal were now dedicated to action, creation, focus. Colleagues noticed the change. Some whispered about the shift in energy I carried, the quiet intensity that wasn't aggression or anger, but something steadier, more grounded. For the first time, I felt competence not as a mask to hide pain, but as a real, tangible reflection of my own agency. Socially, I started reclaiming spaces I had abandoned. Friends I had neglected returned to the forefront, their presence a reminder that life existed beyond the shadow of betrayal. Their laughter, their casual honesty, their ability to exist without scheming or hiding. It reminded me what normal felt like. I realized I had been isolating myself, walling off not just the people I trusted, but also the parts of myself that thrived in connection, in shared experience. I also met someone new, brief, almost incidental at first. A casual encounter, a conversation over coffee that could have been forgotten. But their respect, their subtle kindness, the way they listened without judgment. It felt like sunlight breaking through a storm I didn't even know I was still walking through. It was small, almost trivial, yet struck me profoundly. Someone could exist in my life who didn't carry the weight of betrayal, who didn't demand or manipulate, who simply reflected basic decency. And in recognizing that, I realized I had been starving for simple, honest human respect all along. Boundaries weren't just social. They were emotional, too. I stopped replaying her words in my head. I stopped imagining scenarios in which she might feel remorse or fear. I stopped letting her actions dictate my moods, my decisions, my self-perception. I began journaling again, not as a victim processing grief, but as a person mapping their own reconstruction. I noted patterns I had learned from the betrayal, not to dwell, but to recognize how to protect myself, how to honor my own worth. I invested in passions I had shelved, projects and hobbies I had abandoned, while the illusion of a perfect life consumed my energy. Writing, music, long walks, anything that reminded me that I existed independently of anyone else's approval or betrayal. The more I nurtured these pieces of myself, the more I felt the subtle yet profound shift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actively, consciously rebuilding, shaping, reclaiming. Even as I moved forward, echoes of the past lingered. But now I noticed karmic hints, subtle threads of reality that suggested life has a way of balancing itself. People who had treated me poorly now revealed their own cracks, their own hypocrisy. Those moments didn't give me satisfaction. They gave me perspective. I didn't need revenge to assert my worth. I simply needed to continue building the life she hadn't respected, one choice, one boundary, one deliberate action at a time. Friendships strengthened. Connections deepened. Conversations became more honest. I noticed how resilience works quietly, imperceptibly, not in grand gestures, but in consistent self-respect. I could smile without feeling the weight of deceit lurking behind it. I could speak my mind without anxiety twisting my words. I could walk into a room and occupy space without guilt, without apology, without the lingering fear that someone else's actions define my worth. And in the quiet moments, when no one else was watching, I recognized something I hadn't dared admit before. I had transformed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with deliberate, painful, persistent effort. The victim I had been, confused, betrayed, desperate for answers, was still a part of me, but it was no longer in control. The new me was deliberate, aware, and fiercely protective of the life I was reclaiming. By the end of these weeks, I realized that the betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It had been a catalyst, a brutal and necessary awakening. And in that awakening, I found empowerment I hadn't known I could access. Every action, every boundary, every reclaimed passion was a step toward a life I owned fully, without compromise. The world still had shadows. People still disappointed. Pain still came in waves. But now I could stand against it. I could endure it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, a sense of unwavering, stubborn control over my own life. Life has a way of speaking without raising its voice. I've learned that now. I see it in subtle shifts, small fractures, the way patterns eventually reveal themselves. And over time, I began to notice the ripples of her betrayal, not in ways that directly touched me, but in the way life seemed to respond quietly without my intervention. Her friendships started to fracture. People who once smiled at her casually now glanced with caution or hesitation. The very social circle she had navigated effortlessly began to feel like a hall of mirrors reflecting her choices back at her. I didn't orchestrate it. I didn't need to. It unfolded naturally, with a quiet inevitability that carried its own weight. Watching it happen, I felt something strange, not satisfaction in a petty sense, but a sense of justice. The world had a way of balancing itself, and I no longer needed to force the scale. I saw her stumble in small ways, the careless confidence she once carried replaced with moments of awkwardness and doubt. The friend who had once conspired by her side now distanced herself, subtle yet unmistakable. There was no confrontation, no dramatic revelation, just the consequences of choices meeting reality. It wasn't revenge because I didn't seek it. It was life unfolding naturally, in a way that I had neither controlled nor anticipated. And in that, there was a quiet, almost imperceptible sense of closure. I remained distant, observing without engagement. I didn't gloat. I didn't revel. I didn't even speak of it to anyone. But the awareness of it, the recognition that actions have repercussions, that deception carries its own burden, brought a strange relief. I realized that closure isn't about retaliation. It isn't about forcing someone to feel what you feel. Closure is the quiet understanding that life itself enforces boundaries, that people meet the results of their own choices, and that your role is simply to witness and survive. Reflecting on all of it, I found myself thinking about what betrayal truly does. It doesn't just wound the heart. It exposes truths, it strips illusions, it forces you to confront the foundations you once took for granted. And in exposing those truths, in showing the depth of someone else's detachment, it also forces you to confront your own capacity to endure, to rebuild, and to rise above the chaos. Mutual acquaintances began to see the cracks too, subtle hints of deception that had previously been invisible. Her social standing, once a source of comfort and confidence, began to shift in ways that were unavoidable. I didn't celebrate their discomfort. I simply noted it, an observer of life's natural justice. And it struck me with clarity that what once seemed like my world collapsing had, in fact, been a lens through which I could see the broader truth. People are accountable, even when you choose not to enforce it. I felt no malice, no triumph in watching her stumble. There was only reflection, only understanding. Closure doesn't require anyone else's suffering. It only requires your own release. I didn't need her to apologize, to acknowledge her choices, or to feel regret. The consequences had arrived, whether she noticed or not, and my life had moved on to a place she could no longer touch. Her friend, once a conspirator, became cautious, hesitant. The very dynamic that had seemed so solid, so unshakable, began to crumble. And I recognized that life has its own way of revealing what is built on deception. What feels permanent, what feels safe when constructed on lies, is never truly stable. And yet, I did not feel the urge to intervene. I did not feel the need to accelerate the process. Watching it happen naturally gave me something far more important: perspective, emotional distance, and the ability to move forward unburdened by resentment. And so, I stood apart, quietly observing, reflecting, understanding. I understood that the consequences she faced were hers alone, not my responsibility, not my triumph. And in that understanding, I found something deeper: peace. Not the false peace of denial, not the temporary peace of anger, but the real, unshakable peace of someone who has survived betrayal, reclaimed their life, and let the natural order of things unfold without interference. In the end, closure arrived quietly, not with fanfare, not with confrontation, but with a simple, undeniable awareness. Life restores balance, and you don't have to force it. You only have to survive it, endure it, and reclaim yourself in the spaces that remain. And that is enough. The first morning I woke up without the weight pressing on my chest, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. There were no fireworks, no sweeping revelation. It was quiet, subtle, almost imperceptible. But it was there, a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the storm that had consumed me, they still existed, but they no longer ruled me. I've spent a long time reconstructing myself from fragments I didn't even know were broken. Slowly, deliberately, I nurtured parts of me that had been neglected: passions, friendships, the small joys that make life feel alive. I've discovered that self-worth isn't given. It's claimed, moment by moment, choice by choice. And I've started claiming it every day in ways that are quiet but irreversible. Looking back, I can see how much I've grown. I've learned to feel deeply without being consumed. I've learned that strength isn't the absence of pain, but the ability to carry it and still move forward. I've learned that closure doesn't come from someone else's regret. It comes from the acceptance that you can't control their choices, only your own. And in that acceptance, I found freedom. The people who have remained in my life, those who have been steady and kind, remind me that connection can be nourishing rather than dangerous. My mentor, patient and unwavering, continues to guide me, not with directives or lectures, but with quiet presence that encourages me to trust my own judgment. Friends, both old and new, show me that loyalty and respect are possible, that relationships can be built without fear or suspicion. Each interaction, each honest conversation, becomes a small affirmation that the world still holds beauty and integrity. I still remember her laughter, her absence, the betrayal that once seemed unending. But those memories no longer wound me the way they once did. Instead, they serve as markers, reminders of the journey I endured. I've taken the pain and used it as a lens, not a cage. I see more clearly now, not just the flaws and deceit of others, but my own patterns, my own vulnerabilities, my own capacity for resilience. And in seeing all of it, I feel a strange, profound gratitude for the journey, no matter how painful it was. The world around me feels both familiar and new. I walk into spaces I once avoided, not with fear, but with a quiet confidence. I pursue passions and experiences that enrich rather than distract. I invest in relationships that nurture rather than drain. And I notice, for the first time in a long while, that my choices are mine alone, untainted by obligation, expectation, or the shadow of someone else's betrayal. There's a bittersweetness to it, of course. Loss leaves an imprint. The absence of what I thought would last forever is still there, like a silent echo. But it is an echo, not a chain. I've learned that independence isn't loneliness, it's clarity. It's the ability to see yourself fully, to accept the past without letting it dictate the future, and to build something authentic from the fragments left behind. I feel capable of love again, but not in the way I once did. Not with desperation, not with dependence. Now I know that love must begin with yourself, that emotional maturity requires patience, boundaries, and the courage to honor your own worth. I've learned to stand firmly in my own life, to trust my judgment, and to embrace joy without fear. That is the kind of strength that betrayal cannot touch. And as I look forward, the horizon feels open. I don't know what awaits me, and I no longer fear the uncertainty. The past has shaped me, yes, but does not define me. I have grown stronger, wiser, and more aware. I have learned the limits of control, the depth of my resilience, and the richness of living fully in the present. In the quiet moments, I sometimes return to the spaces where pain once lived, my apartment, the streets I walked endlessly, the cafes and offices that witnessed my struggle. And in those spaces, I feel something remarkable. Not sorrow, not bitterness, not longing. I feel a sense of self I never had before. Whole, grounded, capable, and awake. I am no longer the person who walked into betrayal, helpless and wounded. I am the person who endured it, who survived, who reclaimed herself, or himself, one deliberate step at a time. And in that reclamation, I find the ultimate victory. Not revenge, not validation, but the unshakable knowledge that my life is mine to shape and that I can face it with clarity, strength, and a quiet, enduring peace.